Um, if you plan to be a facilitator in a breakout room, please place your email in the chat so we can add you to the slide deck. And yep, hello everyone. Thanks for coming to the Coastal Resilience Network webinar series. Today's presentation is titled CoSMoS Adapt, Developing Coastal Adaptation Tools to Support Climate Resilience Planning, Policy, and Project Implementation in California. And please place your name and organization in the chat while we wait to begin. The purpose of today's presentation and workshop is to inform users about CoSMoS Adapt, its functionality, and to get input from the audience to confirm the utility of the model and shape further improvements. And Dr. Patrick Barnard will be presenting with Andy O'Neill, Dr. Borja Requero, and Dr. Michael Beck. They have a 35-minute presentation followed by a 12-minute Q&A. After the Q&A, you'll be placed into breakout rooms for 20 minutes. In the breakout rooms, you will join a member of CoSMoS Adapt team and to be in further discussion about how the model can support your work. And post breakout rooms, there will be a 15-minute group discussion to hear what was discussed within the groups. And today you will hear from Dr. Patrick Barnard, who is the Research Director of the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience at UC Santa Cruz. His research focuses on hazards, climate adaptation, resilience, and environmental justice for coastal communities across the United States and beyond. He has served on numerous regional, national, and international scientific panels related to climate change and coastal hazards, including within the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and has advised members of U.S. Congress and Cabinet, as well as state and local government representatives. And now I'll pass the virtual microphone to Patrick and his team to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Thomas. Can you see this okay?
Yep, looks great.
Great. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate everyone joining as we lay out our vision for the future of coastal adaptation research and climate resilience planning policy and project implementation in California, and how hopefully we can support all these efforts moving forward. This is a really large consortium of scientists and policymakers and engagement specialists, and really exciting group. And part of the motivation for this this meeting here today is to lay out our proposal through Prop 4 and Coastal Conservancy for developing these adaptation tools for the state of California, with an initial focus on the South Coast, and to try to gauge the level of interest in the products, and also shape and customize the products so they're more useful. So lots of folks involved here, obviously including the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience, but also our technical contributors and collaborators at USGS and Del Taurus and University of Arkansas. Kevin Beefus is on the line. Policy through UC Santa Barbara and Charles Lester. We've also got a number of engagement communication specialists involved, like the Climate Science Alliance, Amber Paris there, and others. USC Sea Grant, Phyllis Griffman and others, Alyssa Mann at Nature Conservancy along with her colleagues, and then on the decision support tool communication side, our partners at Point Blue Conservation Science. So lots of folks involved. And let's see why that's not advancing. There we go. Yeah, so the motivation for this really goes back quite a ways to the mid-2000s, when sea level really got put on the map as an imminent threat to the infrastructure and people of the state of California. And that sea level rise since has been continued to accelerate, and now the rate is almost 5 millimeters per year as a global average, and that has tripled the rate over the last century. And we know now from extensive research that this sea level is committed to rise for many, many centuries. And so this is going to affect hundreds of millions of people across the world, directly and indirectly, many, many more, and many trillions of dollars in assets that will be exposed to sea level rise and storm-driven flooding over the next century, but not just for these low-lying island nations like the Maldives, which have been well chronicled throughout the press, but also right here in our backyard. And we've really seen sort of how much of a razor edge we are built on even in California with the last trio of winters and the storms that have affected communities across the state. Now, collectively, our research across the state has demonstrated that sea level is going to cost the state about $15 billion for every inch of sea level rise. And as we're looking at about 30 to 35 inches or more of sea level rise over the next century, we're talking about potential impact on the order of $500 billion if we do nothing. And the reason for this is being built along this sort of really razor thin margin. Sea level rise is going to exponentially increase the impacts in our communities, doing nothing. And so, for example, our once in a lifetime coastal flooding event today, we can expect to occur roughly every year by mid-century and roughly every day by the end of the century. And despite all these potential impacts, until recently for the state, there was no comprehensive approach to assess risk to coastal hazards. And there still exists no comprehensive adaptation solutions to reduce risk and no way to evaluate those solutions. And so that's what the gap that we're trying to fill now. And this kind of got us on this pathway to where we are today with CoSMoS Adapt. This was initialized back around 2010 in the USGS development of the coastal storm modeling system to determine the societal risk of coastal hazards. So trying to answer that question of what are we actually being resilient to, what is the risk, and how is it distributed across the state? And that has now been completed, and Andy O'Neill will summarize that work in just about 5 minutes. But through CoSMoS, we enabled the prediction of coastal hazards for the full range of water level and storm conditions, including flooding, coastal erosion, and groundwater. And the model and products were co-developed with numerous end users and stakeholders to ensure that the products directly supported local planning, state, territorial, and federal coastal hazard policy. And this brings us today, which the missing ingredient is really then, okay, now we know what our risk portfolio looks like, but how do we reduce that risk? And so CoSMoS Adapt is an effort to leverage the foundational work of CoSMoS and quantify the benefits of coastal adaptation solutions. And this is where the UCSC Center for Coastal Climate Resilience comes in, which Mike Beck spun up about 3.5 years ago with the vision to advance innovative solutions for building coastal resilience and address the many challenges of climate change. And so within the context of this center, the objectives are to assess coastal risks, to value the benefits of nature and nature-based solutions, and then help identify incentives to invest in solutions to reduce risk and enhance the environment. And Mike's going to talk about more of this in about 15 minutes or so. Now, this collaborative work among USGS, UCSC, and others has been going on even predating the initiation of the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience. For example, Kurt Strelazzi at USGS, along with Borja Reguero and Mike Beck, have been working in the tropics for a number of years to quantify the benefits of habitat restoration, habitat conservation, and the risk of habitat loss, primarily focused on mangroves and coral reefs in these tropical environments in the Caribbean and the Pacific. And then this brings us now to formalizing this approach in California under the moniker of CoSMoS Adapt to evaluate coastal adaptation strategies in this extratropical environment. And this work was piloted through a grant from the Ocean Protection Council as part of California's 5th Climate Change Assessment. And Borja is going to talk about that pilot work in just about 10 minutes or so. So the objectives of this approach is to build upon the baseline hazard exposure assessment of CoSMoS and evaluate the risk reduction benefits of a number of different adaptation scenarios with an emphasis on nature-based solutions these solutions being things like reefs, dune restoration, seawalls, wetland restoration, beach nourishment, etc. So a number of sort of end-member solutions to look at the risk reduction benefits of each for a given region, and then assess the cost effectiveness and equitable distribution of climate adaptation options, and do a lot of work on the viz side and the communication side in terms of co-producing game engine driven visualizations and decision support tools that can help support decision making at the project scale. Now, with the Coastal Conservancy, we are iterating on a potential Proposition 4 proposal to expand the initial pilot work of CoSMoS Adapt in select communities to all the South Coast to assess the cost effectiveness of adaptation actions across this entire region. So one is this sort of high level look at these different end member solutions to look at which part of the coast would benefit from a given intervention. Part 2 is a deeper dive into select subregions to evaluate locally preferred adaptation solutions, so more customizable, practical interventions that communities are considering or want to see tested. And then the next step is to make sure that all this work gets input into existing decision support tools for maximum accessibility, and then advance additional communication tools to be able to visualize the risks, adaptation actions, and trade-offs, and then make a significant investment and engagement so that we can interact with communities and state policymakers to ensure the evidence of nature-based benefits are able to support and incentivize solutions. So we're hoping to get out of this webinar are a number of different things. Number one, we do want to make sure that everyone understands the distinction between CoSMoS, a USGS developed product, and CoSMoS Adapt, which is this new effort that this consortium of groups is pursuing. We want to make sure that you, the end users, recognize the uses of CoSMoS Adapt. So how can this information actually be used in your day-to-day decision making? We'd like to identify additional pilot communities for these deep dives. And so if you're listening to this and you see these presentations and you'd like to be a pilot community, please reach out. We'd like to dig into your community and look at your customized solutions and or ideas that you'd like to see tested. We already have several communities that are very interested, that look like very viable candidates. Then these is through discussions with folks like Mark Baylor at Beacon for the Rincon to Magoo section, and Eric Stein at Squirp for the Seal Beach to Bolsa Chica section, and then Jamie Timberlake at Oceanside. But we'd like to add some more here. We know there's lots of other communities that can benefit from this work. And then lastly, in the breakout rooms, we really want to zero in on the additional functionality and outputs needed to make this product useful. So the big questions are going to be, what is useful that you see now, and what do you need to see to make it useful for your work? So with that, thank you so much for your time, and I'll turn it over to Andy to talk about CoSMoS.
Thanks, Patrick. Let me just get my screen share going. And is that showing up for everybody? Okay, good. Great. Thanks. As mentioned, my name is Andy O'Neill. I'm an oceanographer with the Pacific Coastal Marine Science Center here in Santa Cruz, and I'll be presenting on the Coastal Swim Modeling System, or CoSMoS, here in California. I will be presenting information on all of our CoSMoS efforts, but I'll be focusing on California and provide more details on our flood modeling. And I do want to acknowledge that while you have me speaking here to you today, I am speaking on behalf of a very large team, not only of the folks and the collaborators on the screen now, but lots more folks and collaborators for all of our efforts in all of our different regions. So just to start off with, right, coastal hazards are something that affects our communities now. I think most people share, like me, the lived experience of impacts from really big storms in recent years. So extreme storm conditions present elevated risk to our communities, not only in terms of safety to our communities, but impacts to infrastructure, impacts to resources. And so understanding those hazards are paramount to our ability to plan and deal with those impacts. However, there's many processes and forces from those storms and conditions which drive those hazards, and you need good science to understand that. Here's a snapshot of kind of like some of the forces that were considered when framing our coastal storm modeling framework for California. We have not only regional water level changes, but tidal differences, seasonal effects, storm surge, backflow from fluvial discharge, wave run up and setup, and all of these things combine to elevate the water, kind of that water right at the coast, to drive flooding, coastal erosion, and coastal change. And so again, we need science to understand how all these forces interplay. They're not additive. There's a lot of nonlinear interactions. And this is why CoSMoS was created, really to provide the best science-based information so that we can assess coastal hazards with extreme storm conditions. As Patrick mentioned, it was co-developed with user organizations to consistently meet needs across the state and in all regions that we work in. It was designed for community scale planning. It's a suite of physics-based high-resolution models that really get at the dynamic simulation of the waves, the currents, the storm surge. Think of all those processes on the previous slide and how they interact so that we can have an understanding of those integrated coastal hazards at the end, especially when thinking that we have the morphodynamic change and erosion as well. And there's been a decade plus of development on CoSMoS. So while there are improvements to modules and kind of components as we move into newer regions and newer areas, we are consistent to use the same framework and approach across the state and across our different regions so that the outputs can be used in kind. Again, we also have a consistent suite of scenarios, so water level and storm conditions, such that there can be prioritization exercises. All right, so as mentioned, we have a consistent approach everywhere we work. We kind of have this model train that scales global projections of waves and winds down to the local level, so you can see those local impacts. The components and the particular details underneath this kind of model train approach do change to address the particular processes and contributions of each region that we work at. But again, the entire approach is very consistent. Of course, the results are available not only in geospatial format for technical use, but they're also easily accessible and viewable in online viewers, not only the hazard in OCOF, as many of you are familiar with, but also hazard risk analytics through our USGS HERA site, where you can dig into the information. So just to show some more clear examples of how this may work in California here's the example of how that model train is laid out for our most recent version in California. This is NorCal. We take global wave projections and we run it through a series of tiers going from coarser resolution models down to finer resolution models to get at that swell propagation, storm surge, wave current interaction and wave setup, and getting all the way to the final end where we're taking into account the infragravity wave contributions. So right at that coast, the wave run up and the morphodynamic change to come up with our final flood hazards. So this approach that I just outlined is being done in several areas. We just wrapped up California with our most recent data release. So we have full coverage for Pacific Islands and territories, California and the Southeast Atlantic. And we have recent data releases in Puget Sound in Alaska, and those areas are ongoing. But as mentioned, California is done, thankfully, right? So flood hazard modeling is now done and data is available across the entire state. But again, just harkening back to that decade plus of development, each version that we worked on as we marched across the state incorporated some important updates consistent with that overall approach. So as we move from our original developments in 2.0 and 2.2, so for like the Marin and Sonoma counties on the open coast there, we incorporated more improvements as we moved along. But of course, this is just the flood outputs. We also have cliff retreats and shoreline change projections available for the entire California open coast. a lot of those developments were centered around how we deal with storm scenarios and storm conditions along the coast and framed those storm intensities. So just harking back to my initial slide, right, what we're trying to get at is that elevated coastal water level right at the coast, and that's driven by surge, setup, storm winds, and California, primarily waves. And so our original development really focused on that wave intensity as being the distinguishing identifier between our storm events and storm conditions. However, we have a complex coast when you take into account refraction and wave transformation. That led to kind of some non-progressive behavior in the results, in such that a technically like lower intensity storm might yield more expansive hazards in some select areas. And so as we continue development, we've moved to something where our storm hazards and our storm scenarios are actually a composite of multiple storm events, right? So we use k-means clustering to identify storms that affect sections of coast similarly. So like a 20-year storm will affect north-facing beaches similarly, and another storm will affect south-facing beaches similarly. We identify all those storms ahead of all of our expensive physical simulations, and then we run those through the model train. And so our final product is actually a composite of multiple storms for each storm return period. So at the end of that, right, we have our final flood products in California. We not only have our core products that are available in all of the regions that we work at, the flood extent and flood depth, but we also have coincident flood duration, flood surface water elevation, flood potential, but also maximum wave height and maximum currents associated with those same hazards. And again, those are for all the scenarios covering our range of water level and storm conditions. I do specifically want to highlight flood potential, right? While we use the best available science and we have really good models that drill in with good accuracy on what the outputs and those hazard exposure is going to be, there is an accuracy range with those. There's accuracy to our underlying assumptions with the digital elevation models. There's vertical land motion to consider. And then there's also changes in marsh accretion for San Francisco Bay. And so we take all of those and we combine them with our model output to kind of come up with a physical footprint. It's a change in that extent to express that range of uncertainty, to either show maximum flood potential or minimum flood potential, taking into account all those contributors in a geospatial extent. So we really highly recommend that as you go through planning, you also consider flood potential in any of your planning processes. In addition to our flood products, right, we incorporate shoreline change and cliff retreat projections into our suite of products, outputs across the open coast, again, for a range of water level and model case assumptions, and data sets also include projection uncertainty and baseline assumptions. And lastly, we also have groundwater hazard products. So with increased water level cases, there's a potential for 6 times greater exposure than overland flooding alone. Now, exposure is not impacts. It really depends on the infrastructure or the key resource at risk. But this is an important data set to consider as you're looking at the integrated coastal hazard risk with extreme conditions. So access to all of these products is through a number of sites. You not only have access to the geospatial information that's downloadable for more technical uses via the QR code that you see in the upper right through the USGS data releases, but data is also viewable and easily accessible through 2 online tools. Most of us here should be familiar with Our Coast, Our Future. This is really California focused, where you can access all of the products that I mentioned for all of our available scenarios. We also have data for all regions that we work in HERA. Just to quickly highlight HERA, again, you can look at coastal flooding, coastal groundwater, shoreline change, and then a multi-hazard viewer here. And you not only have access to the hazards in the multi-hazard viewer, but you can look at how the impacts will, or how the hazards will impact people, places, things. So in what communities, what infrastructure, and what resources may be inside those hazard zones. So it's a better way to look at the potential impacts of these hazards, not just the physical extent. So for today, again, just to help clarify the distinction between CoSMoS and CoSMoS Adapt, again, to summarize, CoSMoS is a USGS product and methodology. It's available for all of coastal California and the many other states that I outlined previously. It has coastal flooding, erosion, and groundwater hazard exposure for a range of scenarios. It's viewable on USGS HERA and OCOF for California, and it really supports local decision-making, coastal planning, and supports Department of Interior and USGS priorities to protect people, property, and resources. However, CoSMoS Adapt, being presented here today by UCSC, leverages that USGS modeling as a foundation and our technical expertise, and it's currently a pilot project in select areas in California. The scenarios incorporate adaptation approaches to help reduce coastal flood hazard risk for the range of scenarios, and it directly supports decision-making on coastal adaptation options to reduce that risk. And that concludes my presentation. So moving on.
All right, thanks, Andy. I think I'm next. Right, thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to be providing a summary of the pilot phase of CoSMoS Lab, right? So as Andy, Patrick indicated, this is a joint partnership, a joint project with USGS that has also been supported by the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience and the California Fifth Climate Assessment. So everything that I will be presenting today are draft results and their review for the state climate assessment. This has been a pilot phase. We had two goals: advance the characterization of CoSMoS in terms of coastal risk over time, including tipping points, and also and specifically evaluate quantitatively and prioritizing the precision, right, and the granularity, the spatial granularity of adaptation benefits. So we wanted to include adaptation infrastructure scenarios in the CoSMoS ecosystem and infrastructure. And specifically, we also wanted to evaluate the cost effectiveness of different adaptation strategies. So we applied this pilot phase with the support from the Center and the California Climate Assessment to 7 different municipalities that are actually in these 3 counties, in Surfers Beach in San Mateo, Santa Cruz coastline, and also Ventura. Why we define these 7 municipalities is because they present different realities in terms of socioeconomics, geomorphology, and also it was a really good combination of different test beds for the different things that we wanted to work out for the methodological framework, right? So I'm going to be diving in a little bit in the insights of how the modeling framework and the modeling strategy works. So first, we account for both short and long-term processes, and our strategy has been to separate both. So we factor in with a lot of granularity and precision what happens during storm conditions, so in the scales of hours, right, for the string events. And then we separate those events and those coastal dynamics from what happens in the very long term, like we're talking about decadal changes. So we have a number of tools and approaches and data sets that look at the short-term response of the coastal system, and then another tools that look at the long-term response. So the modeling framework, to summarize it, so we separate the long-term processes and the storm scale of responses. The long-term processes are deal with CoSMoS Coast, building from the CoSMoS infrastructure. And then at the storm scale, we use XFITCH, which is a specific model developed by Deltares to simulate a storm-induced responses in beach and dunes and flooding problems. So then we start defining different time horizons throughout the century, and then we run flood erosion impacts. We look at, we include in those high resolution numerical models, the different adaptation infrastructure systems, And then we run the socioeconomic. So what is at risk and how much risk prevention is prevented by the adaptation solutions. And then we keep looking into how climate will change throughout the century. And we keep advancing and repeating the process, right? So we move the shoreline from 2025 to the mid-century. So now we have a new beach, we have a new DM, and then we repeat the process. So we build the models again, we run the flood and erosion impacts, we look at about what adaptation solutions we could include, we look at the socioeconomics, and we keep going throughout the century, storms, stress testing for storms, and also looking at long-term changes in the different pilot sites. And then we summarize for every time epoch, we summarize all the risk in terms of dollars, the people, and also the indirect effects of those flood impacts and erosion impacts. So we look at risk in terms of dollars and dollars to infrastructure, buildings of different types, from commercial, industrial, public, and private infrastructure, as well as people. And then we develop a cost-benefit analysis to derive the cost effectiveness of investing in different adaptation projects in a spatially discrete form. So getting into the methods and tools, so we had to develop new data sets for that built from CoSMoS for this project. So one of them is new data sets for wave climatology. So we call it cold waves. Is building from the models that Lee presented and the work that that Andy presented, and is based on Lee's work at USGS. Right now, we have two historical reanalyses. They provide hourly wave data since 1940 to present, and also 1979, because we use actually two different climate products. And then we also have future projections for the century from both a high resolution and a lower resolution ensemble. Just to more summarize this, so we have multiple grids that were designed specifically for the project, and validation in different buoys, and we are producing this kind of wave climatologies for the climate assessment. So we use that wave data, and we couple that with high resolution or high fidelity storm models. And here you can see a little bit of the detail of these grids. So we need a lot of spatial precision, a lot of spatial granularity to actually account for wave structure interaction processes, as well as sediment transport processes, right? So we actually need to see the individual structures to at present, but also include new projects in the models to simulate the effect of dunes or seawalls or any other type of spatially explicit structure that we want to include in the models. We also factor in the change in dunes. So we build new dunes, but we also have dunes in different regions. So we run simulations that are essentially maintaining that are not moving the sand in dunes, and we run another set of models that are actually moving the sediment from the dunes to the beach, right? So and we get like really interesting behaviors. But the bottom line here is that we are actually being able to factor in the probability of failure of those dunes and the reconstruction of them, and then that gets included in the economic analysis as well. And looking at the long term, beyond the storm scale, we are also moving the shoreline, building from the CoSMoS coast projections that were run for this project with a new local wave data at very local scales at the near shore. And then we're moving that shoreline and factoring over in the future about where, if the beach retreats or advances in some cases, and then how that's affecting flooding and erosion at the storm scale. And then, so we built this model for the 7 municipalities, but actually we took several benchmark case studies, like specifically the bomb swells for 23 and 24 in Santa Cruz. And we use high resolution models to actually reflect the flood impacts that we had during those events. We use this kind of 3D simulations to actually verify that we more or less get the same impact areas, and also more or less the same overtopping events in specific areas, right? So that's one of the validation pieces we use. We also use flooding during those storms, as well as the LiDAR data that was developed by USGS for West Cliff area, for example. And all that is validated and cross-checked with the storm models that we use for predicting risk. So the results are really high-resolution flat maps for different scenarios, different storm probabilities, but also moving into the century, how those flat zones will be evolving. And then in the red dots that you see there, in the red polygons, those are specific buildings with specific socioeconomic attributes from the National Structure Inventory from FEMA, and that provides you what type of infrastructure and how many people and what type of businesses are especially affected by those flat zones. And everything gets summarized in this kind of graphics that you see on your right, where something interesting that we found is flood risk will increase to the mid-century, but we find consistently in all the areas non-linear increases after the mid-century. Why this is happening is a combination of factors, the sea level rise, but it's also like coastal squeeze, and also reduced sea level allowance from existing coastal infrastructure systems such as seawalls, right? So those seawalls are providing some protection with a little bit more of water by the mid-century and higher waves and a little bit less beach. With those infrastructure systems will be failing more regularly, and this is what you see in this kind of non-linear increase. This is actually results for Santa Cruz, but in Ventura and Half Moon Bay are actually substantially larger than these factors that I'm showing here. So once we have built that big effort, so we're talking about really, really expensive models that are run actually at the UC San Diego supercomputer. Then we include different adaptation infrastructure options. These are placed pseudo-algorithmically based on different prefeasibility criteria. So we put these projects individually in the models. They are rerun, and then we calculate the socioeconomics associated with them. You see some of the examples here for the Santa Cruz Line Beach and Capitola, just building seawalls versus reefs versus dunes. Obviously, they have different effects depending on the geophysics of each site and also the geomorphology. And then everything gets summarized into a cost-benefit analysis. Here you see the present value that represents essentially how much economic or social risk reduction you get. And then also benefit cost ratios graphics that indicate is a proxy of cost effectiveness, right? And something interesting, if you look at these are the results for Santa Cruz. In the report, you will be able to see equivalent results for the other two sites. But you can see that consistently we find that dunes, even when they are able to fail more frequently than other systems like seawalls, they are still becoming quite cost effective in the long run. Just because they are reducing quite a lot of the flooding during the storm scales. And then here you see a comparison just to wrap up the results between the Santa Cruz County and Ventura. So the cost effectiveness values are highly variable locally and along the shore. But you can see that we can see some consistent patterns, like seawalls are becoming more cost effective with higher sea levels in the future. So that's dunes. And also the benefit cost ratio. So the cost effectiveness is particularly high for dunes, even when we factor this frequent maintenance and rebuilding based on the probability of failure. So we end up with benefit cost ratios well above 1 in most of the systems for the entire areas for both dunes and seawall systems. So some of the conclusions, so we tested this in this first pilot. We have to develop new data sets that can be now applied for California-wide. So with the climate assessment, they will become available and could be tested for other, with our models and the USGS framework, but also in other projects. We found out that the high fidelity models are able to factor these effects of both structural and nature-based features, providing high fidelity outputs and replication of those impacts. These pilots confirm a viable deployment on both relatively large scales. Like we're talking about county-wide scales in the range of 20 kilometer shoreline sections, more or less. Obviously, one of the tricks here was we wanted to work out the methodology and the different challenges, technical challenges, in such a way that could be deployed at a scale. We don't want to do like case-by-case models, but it had to be something that could be deployed pseudo-algorithmically, at relatively large scales. And then in terms of risk and adaptation results, so we found no linear change in risk associated with these factors that I explained before. Also, the evaluation of adaptation options needs to consider both short-term and long-term responses. Some of these factors are more or less relevant in different sites, and it's not totally evident where they will be. And then new insight was also provided into the variability of cost effectiveness of different interventions. The spatial variation, the gradients that we see along the shorelines, they are actually very strong. And in terms of just to inform a little bit of the discussions on breakout groups, so some of the ongoing and future improvements that we have received already feedback, and we have been discussing intensively with USGS. Has been also with the other stakeholders is RIPRAP stability. That's something that has been faced. Analysis of effects on various infrastructure assets and beneficiaries, for example, impacts on public versus residential infrastructure. We have now results that can analyze those 2 points, but we haven't not developed those analyses yet. Long-term shoreline change, for example, updating the projections of shoreline changes that are in CoSMoS, but also including the effects of different infrastructure, not only groins, but also potential reef sections, etc. And then the cliff erosion model was not implemented in this pilot phase, but we do have plans and drafted ideas of how it will be implemented in the future, as well as for the co-benefits, for example, recreation of the beach areas. We try to prioritize the direct damage effects, although we also include indirect effects, but we don't include other co-benefits of potential nature-based adaptation features, for example. As well as other improvements in the economics that we haven't discussed in this webinar. Right. Thanks.
Okay, assume you can see my screen. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Beck. I'm the director of the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience here at UC Santa Cruz. I got 10 minutes to tell you a little bit about the new decision support tools and a little bit about financing for solutions. So we're going to have to move it right along. First, I want to show you a little bit about how we're taking the results that Borja was describing and Andy as well, and putting them into some more interactive decision support tools. The idea is to make all of the data available so that it gets incorporated into our coast, our future, and tools like that. But we also think there's been a lot of innovation in tool development. So I'm going to show here what's currently a protected site under development, showcasing some of the Santa Cruz results that Borja was describing. So again, we're kind of looking at the area from New Brighton to here at the Marine Lab where I sit. We can zoom in a little bit here. We look at a variety of storm return periods and the changes in flooding under those. We look at a variety of different time periods into the future to assess what that flooding can look like. The tools have lots of capabilities for zooming, changing perspectives. We have the damages information that Borja was describing here for Santa Cruz and for Capitola, indicating what are the damages associated with the flooding under these different scenarios, both at present and into the future. And then, just as Borja described, we have a variety of different solutions, and so we can showcase what the changes in flooding are with those different adaptation options, where they are within the model framework that we set up, and then what the avoided damages are. And again, both at present and into the future. So this gives you, kind of some context for how we're able to look more comprehensively, or be able to visualize in better ways some of these with these new tools. Borja also mentioned the CalWaves data. I'll show you again the site that we're developing that will ultimately make all of this data available statewide for CalWaves. We have summarized a variety of different wave characteristics from past, present, and into future. We've done that near shore and offshore at a variety of different depths. What I happen to be showing here is change in significant wave height associated, the significant wave height associated with a 100-year return period, comparing present to what that will look like in the future, and the percent increase in that significant wave height. And then there will be a variety of your commonly used wave characteristic statistics for planning available associated with those. And again, this is in development with some support from the state at present. Okay. That covers those parts, and then I just want to briefly say a couple of things about how we think about innovative approaches to financing these adaptation options in general and nature-based solutions in particular. Obviously, this is a vaster subject that we're going to cover in just a couple of minutes here, but I just want to say a few of the areas that we spend a lot of time thinking about, we'll continue to expand upon here in the state and elsewhere. Many folks who are familiar with our work know that we've been doing a lot to change the way that we think about our natural infrastructure and think about how we invest in our natural infrastructure. What Borja showed in terms of the benefit cost analysis that we've been doing here in the state, and then with USGS, we've been doing for reefs and other habitats throughout the U.S., is to value their benefits, be able to treat them in benefit cost analysis, just as we would treat hard infrastructure, so that we can begin to change the way that we spend hazard mitigation, disaster recovery money, and think about how we can work with nature, which includes changing some policies. For example, getting, for example, reefs identified as natural infrastructure in executive orders and legislation, something that actually already exists here in California and that we can build on a little bit more directly. We also work a lot with the risk industry, including insurance, to help change risk models, change the incentives that are offered. We really think that the industry has a much more important role to play in incentives for adaptation, and not just nature-based solutions, but adaptation in general. We're kind of working with the industry and pushing them as friends and colleagues to be able to really help us build a more resilient future, figure out the ways to incentivize that, including insuring nature. And then we've been working on a variety of new things like how to advance adaptation markets. We currently support, I'll switch just for a second to this slide. If we think about the state's leadership in mitigation, what we're doing is we're creating incentives and markets that allow us to reduce risk, to invest in reducing risks to future people, property, and nature, Can't we figure out some innovative approaches to be able to invest and build markets now that allow us to invest in the climate change impacts that we're already seeing? So that's a very important piece of what we're very actively working on. You'll soon see some announcements about resilience credits and the like. I can't get too much more into that, but we are thinking about a variety of innovative ways to finance that. I got just maybe one more minute. I want to point to one recent study. This is for Florida wetlands, but one of the completely new approaches that we've been applying here is to note that homeowners, so we used Zillow sales data of homes and showed that after heavy storm seasons, home prices coastally go down across Florida. But the closer you are to mangroves, the less those prices go down, and the sooner they come up. This could provide important new economic incentives, showcasing the importance that homeowners already understand the values of these adaptation options. All right, I just want to finish up, say that we all appreciate the time that you've given us. Look forward to the discussions. We're going to be providing this. I've seen some comments in the chat. We'll be providing the slides and the summaries, so you'll have all of this information. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you to the CoSMoS team and the CoSMoS Adapt team for your presentation. And it looks like we don't have too much time for question and answer as of right now. If there's any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. And if we didn't get to all your questions, we would like to have you have ample time in the breakout rooms to discuss. And I will stop the recording. Oh.
So Thomas, I see a couple questions in the chat.